Russian Academy of Sciences. The rotors were rearranged one above the other and spun in opposite directions, principles still used in modern twin-rotor designs. In his 1768 Theorie de la vis d'Archimede, Alexis Jean-Pierre Paucton suggested the use of one air screw for lift and a second for propulsion, nowadays called a gyrodyne. In 1784, Launoy and Bienvenu demonstrated a flying model with coaxial, contra-rotating rotors powered by a simple spring similar to a bow saw, now accepted as the first powered helicopter. Attempts at man-powered flight still persisted. Paucton's rotorcraft was man-powered, while another approach, also originally studied by Leonardo, was the use of flap valves. The flap valve is a simple hinged flap over a hole in the wing. In one direction it opens to allow air through and in the other it closes to allow an increased pressure difference. An early example was designed by Bauer in 1764.55. Later in 1808 Jacob Dijon built an ornithopter with flap valves, in which the pilot stood on a rigid frame and worked thewings with a movable horizontal bar. 56. His 1809 attempt at flight failed, so he then added a small hydrogen balloon and the combination achieved some short hops. Popular illustrations of the day depicted this machine without the balloon, leading to confusion as to what had actually flown. In 1811, Albrecht Berblinger built an ornithopter based on Dijon's design but omitted the balloon, plunging instead into the Danube. The fiasco did have an upside. George Kiley, also taken in by the illustrations, was spurred to publish his findings to date for the sake of giving a little more dignity to a subject bordering upon the ludicrous in public estimation, and the modern era of aviation was born. 57. 19th century. Throughout the 19th century, tower jumping was replaced in popularity by the equilateral balloon jumping as a way to demonstrate the continued uselessness of manpower and flapping wings. Meanwhile, the scientific study of heavier-than-air flight began in earnest. Sir George Kiley and the first modern aircraft. Sir George Kiley was first called the father of the aeroplane in 1846. 58. During the last years of the previous century he had begun the first rigorous study of the physics of flight and would later design the first modern heavier-than-air craft. Among his many achievements, his most important contributions to aeronautics include clarifying our ideas and laying down the principles of heavier-than-air flight. Reaching a scientific understanding of the principles of bird flight. Conducting scientific aerodynamic experiments demonstrating drag and streamlining movement of the center of pressure, and the increase in lift from curving the wing surface. Defining the modern aeroplane configuration comprising a fixed wing, fuselage and tail assembly. Demonstrations of manned, gliding flight. Setting out the principles of power-to-weight ratio in sustaining flight. From the age of 10, Kiley began studying the physics of bird flight and his school notebooks contained sketches in which he was developing his ideas on the theories of flight. It has been claimed, 59, that these sketches show that Kiley modeled the principles of a lift-generating inclined plane as early as 1792 or 1793. In 1796, Kiley made a model helicopter of the form commonly known as a Chinese flying top, unaware of Launoy and Bienvenu's model of similar design. He regarded the helicopter as the best design for simple vertical flight, and later in his life in 1854 he made an improved model. He gave a Mr. Cooper credit for being the first person to improve on the clumsy structure of the toy and reports Cooper's Model A's ascending 20 or 30 feet. Kiley made one and a Mr. Coulson made a copy, described by Kiley as a very beautiful specimen of the screw propeller in the air and capable of flying over 90 feet high. 60. Kiley's next innovations were twofold. The adoption of the whirling arm test rig, invented in the previous century by Benjamin Robbins to investigate aerodynamic drag and used soon after by John Smeaton to measure the forces on rotating windmill blades. 61. For use in aircraft research together with the use of aerodynamic models on the arm, rather than attempting to fly a model of a complete design. He initially used a simple flat plane fixed to the arm and inclined at an angle to the airflow. In 1799, he set down the concept of the modern aeroplane as a fixed-wing flying machine with separate systems for lift, propulsion, and control. 62. 63. On a small silver disc dated that year, he engraved on one side the forces acting on an aircraft and on the other a sketch of an aircraft design incorporating such modern features as a cambered wing, separate tail comprising a horizontal tailplane and vertical fin, and fuselage for the pilot suspended below the center of gravity to provide stability. The design is not yet wholly modern, incorporating as it does two pilot-operated paddles or oars which appear to work as flap valves. 64. 65. He continued his research, and in 1804 constructed a model glider which was the first modern heavier-than-air flying machine, having the layout of a conventional modern aircraft with an inclined wing towards front and adjustable tail at the back with both tailplane and fin. The wing was just a toy paper kite, flat and uncambered. A movable weight allowed adjustment of the model's center of gravity. 66. It was very pretty to see when flying down a hillside, and sensitive to small adjustments of the tail. 67. Governable parachute design of 1852. By the end of 1809, he had constructed the world's first full-size glider and flown it as an unmanned tethered kite. In the same year, goaded by farcical antics of his contemporaries, see above, he began the publication of a landmark three-part treatise titled On Aerial Navigation, 1809-1810. 68. In it he wrote the first scientific statement of the problem. The whole problem is confined within these limits, viz. To make a surface support a given weight by the application of power to the resistance of air. He identified the four vector forces that influence an aircraft: thrust, lift, drag and weight, and distinguished stability and control in his designs. Hoped that manpower alone was insufficient, and while no suitable power source was yet available, he discussed the possibilities and even described the operating principle of the internal combustion engine using a gas and air mixture. 69. However, he was never able to make a working engine and confined his flying experiments to gliding flight. He also identified and described the importance of the cambered aerofoil, dihedral, diagonal bracing and drag reduction, and contributed to the understanding and design of ornithopters and parachutes. In 1848, he had progressed far enough to construct a glider in the form of a triplane large and safe in a tow carrier child. A local boy was chosen, but his name is not known. 70. 71. He went on to publish the design for a full-size manned glider or governable parachute to be launched from a balloon in 1852, and then to construct a version capable of launching from the top of a hill. We carried the first adult aviator across Brompton Dale in 1853. The identity of the aviator is not known. It has been suggested variously as Kiley's coachman, 72, footman or butler, John Appleby, who may have been the coachman, 70, or another employee, or even Kiley's grandson George John Kiley. 59. What is known is that he was the first to fly in a glider with distinct wings, fuselage and tail, and featuring inherent stability and pilot-operated controls. The first fully modern and functional heavier-than-air craft. Minor inventions included the rubber-powered motor, which provided a reliable power source for research models. By 1808, he had even reinvented the wheel, devising the tension-spoked wheel in which all compression loads are carried by the rim, allowing a lightweight undercarriage. 73. The Age of Steam. Drawing directly from Cayley's work, William Samuel Henson's 1842 design for an aerial steam carriage broke new ground. Henson proposed a 150 feet, 46 m, span high-winged monoplane, with a steam engine driving two-pusher configuration propellers. Although only a design, scale models were built in 1843, 74, or 1848, 75, and flew 10 or 130 feet. It was the first in history for a propeller-driven fixed-wing aircraft. 74, 75, 76. Henson and his collaborator John Stringfellow even dreamed of the first aerial transit company. 77, 78, 79. 1843 Engraving of the aerial steam carriage. In 1856, Frenchman Jean-Marie Le Brise made the first flight higher than his point of departure, by having his glider L'Albatros artificial pulled by a horse on a beach. He reportedly achieved a height of 100 meters, over a distance of 200 meters. The British advances had galvanized French researchers. 74. Starting in 1857, Felix du Temple and his brother Louis built several models using a clockwork mechanism as a power source and later as Mal steam engine. 80, 81. In 1857 or 1858, a pound-and-a-half model was able to fly briefly and land. 74, 81. Francis Herbert Wenham presented the first paper to the newly formed Aeronautical Society, later the Royal Aeronautical Society, on aerial locomotion. He took Cayley's work on cambered wings further, making important findings about both the wing aerofoil section and lift distribution. To test his ideas, from 1858 he constructed several gliders, both manned and unmanned, and with up to 5 stacked wings. He concluded correctly that long, thin wings would be better than the bat-like ones suggested by many, because they would have more leading edge for their area. Today this relationship is known as the aspect ratio of a wing. The latter part of the 19th century became a period of intense study, characterized by the gentlemen scientists who represented most research efforts until the 20th century. Among them was the British scientist, philosopher and inventor Matthew Piers Watt Boulton, who wrote an important paper in 1864, on aerial locomotion, which also described lateral flight control. He was the first to patent an aileron control system in 1868. 82, 83, 84, 85. In 1864, Lecomte Ferdinand Charles Honoré Philippe d'Estaing published a study on the flight of birds, Du vol des oiseaux, and the next year Louis-Pierre Muillard published an influential book, The Empire of the Air, L'Empire de l'Air. 1866 saw the founding of the Aeronautical Society of Great Britain, and 2 years later the world's first aeronautical exhibition was held at the Crystal Palace, London, where Stringfellow was awarded a £100 prize for the steam engine with the best power-to-weight ratio. 86, 87. Jean-Marie Le Brise and his flying machine, Albatros II, 1868. In 1871, Wenham and Browning made the first wind tunnel. 89. Members of the society used the tunnel and learned that cambered wings generated considerably more lift than expected by Cayley's Newtonian reasoning, with lift-to-drag ratios of about 5:1 at 15 degrees. This clearly demonstrated the possibility of building practical heavier-than-air flying machines. What remained were the problems of controlling and powering the craft. Alphonse Pénaud, a Frenchman living from 1850 to 1880, made significant contributions to aeronautics. He advanced the theory of wing contours and aerodynamics and constructed successful models of aeroplanes, helicopters and ornithopters. In 1871, he flew the first aerodynamically stable fixed-wing aeroplane, a model monoplane he called the Planophore, a distance of 40 meters, 130 feet. P. Nord's model incorporated several of Kiley's discoveries, including thews of a tail, wing dihedral for inherent stability, and rubber power. The Planifer also had longitudinal stability, being trimmed such that the tail plane was set at a smaller angle of incidence than the wings, an original and important contribution to the theory of aeronautics. 90. Planifer, a model aeroplane by Alphonse P. Nord, 1871. By the 1870s, lightweight steam engines had been developed for their experimental use in aircraft. Felix du Temple's 1874 monoplane Felix du Temple eventually achieved a short hop with a full-size manned craft in 1874. His monoplane was a large aircraft made of aluminium, with a wingspan of 42 feet 8 in, 13 m, and a weight of only 176 pounds, 80 kilograms, without the pilot. Several trials were made with the aircraft, and it achieved liftoff under its own power after launching from a ramp, glided for a short time and returned safely to the ground, making it the first successful powered hop in history, a year ahead of Moy's Flight. 80. 91. The aerial steamer, made by Thomas Moy, sometimes called the Moy-Schill aerial steamer, was an unmanned tandem wing aircraft driven by a 3-horsepower, 2.2 kilowatts, steam engine using methylated spirits as fuel. It was 14 feet, 4.3 m, long and weighed about 216 pounds, 98 kilograms, of which the engine accounted for 80 pounds, 36 kilograms, and ran on 3 wheels. It was tested in June 1875 on a circular rolled gravel track of nearly 300 feet, 91 m, diameter. It did not reach a speed of above 12 miles per hour, 19 kilometers per hour, but a speed of around 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour, would be necessary to lift off. 92. However, it is credited with being the first steam-powered aircraft to have left the ground under its own power by the historian Charles Gibbs Smith. 93. 94. P. Nord's later project for an amphibian aeroplane, although never built, incorporated other modern features. A tailless monoplane with a single vertical fin and twin tractor air screws. It also featured hinged rear elevator and rudder surfaces, retractable undercarriage and a fully enclosed, instrument cockpit. The aeroplane of Victor Titin, 1879, equally authoritative as a theorist was P. Nord's fellow countryman Victor Titin. In 1879, he flew a model which, like P. Nord's project, was a monoplane with twin tractor propellers but also had a separate horizontal tail. It was powered by compressed air, with the air tank forming the fuselage. In Russia, Alexander Mojisky constructed a steam-powered monoplane driven by one large tractor and 2 smaller pusher propellers. In 1884, it was launched from a ramp and remained airborne for 98 feet, 30 m. That same year in France, Alexandre Goupil published his work La locomotion aérienne, aerial locomotion, although the flying machine he later constructed failed to fly. Maxim's flying machine Sir Hiram Maxim was an American who moved to England and adopted English nationality. He chose to largely ignore his contemporaries and build his own whirling arm rig and wind tunnel. In 1889, he built a hangar and workshop in the grounds of Baldwin's Manor at Bexley, Kent, and made many experiments. He developed a biplane design which he patented in 1891 and completed as a test rig 3 years later. It was an enormous machine, with a wingspan of 105 feet, 32 m, a length of 145 feet, 44 m, fore and aft horizontal surfaces and a crew of 3. Twin propellers were powered by two lightweight compound steam engines, each delivering 180 horsepower, 130 kilowatts. Overall weight was 7,000 pounds, 3,200 kilograms. Later modifications would add more wing surfaces as shown in the illustration. Its purpose was for research and it was neither aerodynamically stable nor controllable, so it ran on a 1,800 feet, 550 m, track with a second set of restraining rails to prevent it from lifting off, somewhat